Hey, thanks for joining again with the Starlink Beta discussion. As you have probably seen from the past couple videos, I'm a little new to this, and I've just now got in on the Starlink Beta. I've just been testing this for the last couple of days, so we did the unboxing, did the basic setup. So yesterday I was able to go ahead and set it up in let's call it a semi-permanent location. I still need to get it mounted up on the roof, but at least it's working now. It's out on the back porch. Not really anything super interesting to show there. So I do have it configured. I've been doing some experimenting, a little bit of speed tests, so we'll do a little bit more of that, and I'll show you a little bit of some of the things that I found. So enough of me. I'm going to go ahead and pause, and we'll move over to the screen. I'm just on my MacBook, and I just want to show a couple of interesting things. So I am hardwired in, and you're seeing this in real time, so we're actually seeing things as they happen. So I did find that on the router there are two ports. There's a LAN port and an aux port. So I did dig around in some of the FAQs, the documentation, and found that that aux port has actually now been enabled as a LAN port, which is good because I would have tested it anyway with both a LAN cable and a console cable, but in this case they beat me to it and documented it, so I tested it. And it seems to work okay. I would say wired is probably a little better. Honestly, the router not great, but you know, for a beta, it's not bad. So I've done a bit of testing. So let's start with one of the things that's interesting here is I have a Raspberry Pi here that I've been using for some speed tests and things, some command line speed tests and whatnot. And so I left this up here because it's interesting because this is connected wirelessly, so that is correct. However, my current MacBook Pro is not showing up in here, so not a huge issue, but just a little odd that only wireless connections show up. So I'm going to go ahead and pop over to the support tab. Oh, I'm sorry, I want to show this real quick before I go to support. So it does show me after 24 hours, it finally started showing me that there's some obstructions, which is interesting because it's in the backyard, it's on the side of the house, it's fairly low to the ground. So I expected that this might be the case. So about 2 hours each day, it's saying that there's some obstruction. And I'll be honest, there's been quite a bit of packet drops, but this is also comparable to most cable providers that I've seen in rural areas and better than most DSL connections as far as packet loss, jitter, things like that. So back to here. So before we run a speed test, let's take a look at the support tab. So of course check for obstructions, that's where we just were. If I go back to support, statistics. So this one's interesting. There's a lot of data here. This looks much better on the computer screen than it did on the smaller phone screen. So you'll notice my ping success is not terrible. I mean, and there are some fairly decent valleys though that are definitely taking out my internet service. So this is not ready for prime time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that following when I'm done with this. Latency, so we'll notice there was some fairly large spikes, but for the most part it's staying fairly steady. So other than this, it's pretty reasonable. I have some ideas on how I'm going to clean this up with some of the VMware, the VelaCloud by VMware software-defined WAN. Just in interest of full disclosure, I do work for VMware. I am not being paid for any of this by VMware. This is all out of pocket. However, I just want to test it and see what will happen. So you'll notice here I was doing some messing around with things. So current time is approximately 2:10 or 14:10, and so you'll notice that this was some times when I was doing some download tests. You'll see a little bit of upload. This is unclear as to what's going on here, but it's not a ton of upload, but it is a little. So this, it's the connection. So the I would have assumed signal to noise, but signal to noise ratio, but this appears to just be the strength of the connection to the current satellite. So you'll notice as they're adding satellites, it gets better. There's just an email that came out today that said that they've added quite a few more satellites, and they have a lot more going up next quarter. So, by the way, we're 2 months into this beta. So I'm 2 days, but Starlink overall is 2 months. So this is impressive. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I get nothing out of this other than just this is what I enjoy. This is very impressive so far. So my son, big Fortnite fan, and so 49 seconds. Well, now it's 111. So this is playable. I mean, it's not great, but he's been playing with this. Even on our fiber, we cannot get the latency down on this one particular app. I don't know why on Fortnite. So this seems a little high, but it's been staying fairly low. You'll notice some of the latency is a little higher. We're probably just having some connectivity challenges. So contact support, of course, I can reboot stow, which just puts it back into, basically it tells it go to sleep, so I can shut it down. Some interesting stuff in advanced, interesting stuff that you can see, and then of course your legal information. So I'm going to come back to home. I want to run a couple of different speed tests. So the one that they provide, and I thought this was interesting, is they chose the Netflix speed test as you saw in the previous video, most likely. I'm just going to go ahead and run that. It's going to run the fast.com speed test. So a little slow, so we must be having some blockage. And I've noticed that sometimes you run this more than once and it seems to speed up. So I don't know what the deal is. Just seems to be the way of it. Now while I'm doing this, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a terminal window, and we're going to go ahead and run a ping test. Sorry about that. So let's see if I can do this. Stand by. Okay, so we're getting 11 megs, so that's not ideal. So let's go ahead and do a split screen here. So tile that left, tile this right. So I'm going to go ahead and run a ping to Cloudflare, and at the same time I'm going to go ahead and rerun that speed test. So see, yeah, now it's picking up a little bit, so we might have just had a weird, see, we're getting some weird lag here. I'm not 100% sure what's going on with that. I think that's just the nature of this thing being an early adopter. So not bad. Latency not ideal, but it is what it is. It's satellite. This is better than a lot of the stuff that I've seen in the past. And my upload speeds are not terrible. I mean, I live in a metro area. I get symmetric gig fiber, so this is terrible for me. But considering the target market, this is pretty impressive, and considering that we're this early in the phase. So let's let that complete. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up speedtest.net. I like to run multiples just to see what happens. So you'll notice I am Starlink. I am hitting Rock Island Communications out in Seattle, Washington. Let's see what that does. Hopefully it doesn't time out on me. There it goes. So latency is a little higher than it's been. It is what, again, it's satellite, so take what we can get. Maybe rerun this test here in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and bring up another window for Google speed test. See, and we're getting this. This seems to happen every minute or a few minutes, just depending. Time of day may have something to do with it, I'm not sure. Where I have it placed, I'll be moving it at some point in the near future. So this is not wanting to complete because we just lost the internet. So if I were to come back here, and let's just go back. So one thing that I found interesting, so this is 192.168.100.1 is the IP address of the receiver. So just interesting to me. It's similar to what most of the cable modem providers use as well for their connection. So let's try this again. Now that the internet's back, as we can see, we lost almost 21 pings there. So let's let this go. Now we're connected to Metapeer in Seattle again. See, now we dropped a couple more. There we go. Ping time's a little better, although speed's worse. So I will be honest, it is very incredibly variable. There's just way too much variance in this. But again, just everybody keep in mind we are in a beta, so it's going to take time to get better. But this is definitely pretty compelling stuff so far. So we're just about done. So that's not terrible. I mean, it's not great, but it's pretty decent speeds. So let's run one more speed test with Google. Maybe. Let's try to refresh that. That's why we're dropping the packets. Okay. So it's doing pretty well. A little slower this one. Oh, they're just catching up now. It's a little slower. I definitely wouldn't put my family on this as the primary. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. Okay, so you can see it's not great, but it's not terrible. I take exception with being able to handle multi-streaming with that much packet loss. You're going to be doing a lot of buffering. So, okay, so let's go ahead and close that. Stop the ping test. And let's come back to the status. So, yeah, so not a lot to see there. Also did want to come back to, I am hardwired in from my laptop. This is the same screen that you would get in the app. So, like I said, this is very similar to a cable modem interface. So, it has to be, I'm assuming, connecting to the receiver dish. There just must be a little web server running in there, just like there would be on a cable modem. So, very simple. They have said that there's some new features coming out that I will review as soon as it's available. But I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and we're going to come back to. I'm going to come back on camera and talk a little bit about some of the tests that I've run over the last couple. Okay, so now we're back, and as we, I kind of walked you through some of the things that are going on internally. So wanted to kind of talk about some of the tests that I've run so far and some of the things that I've found unique and interesting. So I was able to plug this into my Unified Dream Machine Pro on WAN port 9, so that's the WAN 2 for anybody who's using that. And I did test failover. I actually plugged it into the primary WAN port and ran that for a little bit. Needed to do some work, so I actually swapped back to my fiber provider. The video calls I was a little nervous about for some of the important video calls, so I didn't want to risk it. However, I did manage to get a little bit of testing in with that. Did find some weird things in the Unified Dream Machine Pro that I could only get it to go into failover. It would not do load balancing. I need to find out why. I'm not sure if that's a change. I just updated the Unified Dream Machine Pro a couple weeks ago and I hadn't really paid attention, so that may actually be a code change. I needed to double check with Unify. And also, I found that, and also I plugged it into my, I have another Unified Dream Machine that's getting ready to go to another house. And so I used that for a while to do some testing, and that worked really well. From an internet perspective, if I didn't know that it was satellite, I would just think I had some latency issues and some packet drops. So that was a little bit challenging, a little bit frustrating a few times, but worked out really well once I got past the packet drops and things. And again, keeping in mind we're 2 months into a beta of a satellite internet, and we're already outperforming many rural broadband providers. So I would not have any complaints. This is just kind of giving you the real honest truth of how this has gone. So did some testing on that. Did some testing with it, both wired and wireless. Speed tests a little faster on the wired. I get a little bit better performance out of my Unify system than I do both wired and wireless than I do out of their router. It appears to be based on OpenWRT, which I love that product. Well, I love the code, and it's just basically it's a very crippled router, which, as you would expect for something like this. I would say that it's far better than what most of your cable or fiber providers are going to give you, your DSL providers. But it's just a cheap router testing. Mostly at this point, the testing is just latency and watching for improvements. But as you've seen, speeds are staying fairly consistent, latency staying fairly consistent. There's some spikes, some lags. Probably would not use this as my primary internet at this point. Although I would say that give this another 6 months to a year, and this will probably become my primary internet provider in the 2 properties that I own, and I would definitely have no problem installing this for for anyone that was interested. So thanks, and I will keep testing and keep updating.